So there has been a ROM for the Castlevania Bloodlines 0.5 beta that was recently released to the public, and this really has been a long time coming. The beta has technically been a thing that we all knew about since an eBay listing for the cart back in around 2002, and it kind of resurfaced in 2014 when the supposed buyer ripped the ROM from the cart and advertised selling it before going silent for years. Either way, it looks like the ROM was kept behind closed doors for 7 years before the decision to release it to the public happened, and that's the backstory as we know it. So this is the second build, and one that we had seen previews for in magazines prior to the game's release, so there's that. I'm going to do a quick run through of the beta and note the details between this and the final release of the game, and I will post a link to the download of the ROM for yourself in the video description for you to grab it. The game's not finished, but I'll highlight things as I go. Okay, so for the opening, no background is in the opening like it is in the final build. There's no blood, there's no bones, there's no nothing. So right off the bat, you can see that Eric's sprite is holding his spear over the shoulder rather than under his forearm, which was likely changed in the final build to negate problems with the higher hitbox detection. You'll notice that Eric's full 180-degree spear attack exists, but it isn't fully animated yet, so that looks clunky. John has a different death animation that is reminiscent of Ghosts and Goblins that is also not made in the final build. Here we get to see the spellbook, and the spellbook power-up that gives you either gems or a full weapon upgrade has a skull motif rather than the Bible look of the final release. You'll also notice zombies have these flies buzzing around them. That is taken out of the final release for some reason. Unfortunate, because I thought that was cool. You'll notice every time you get the third weapon power-up, you'll hear one of 3 classic tunes, either Vampire Killer, Bloody Tears, or Beginning from Castlevania's 1, 2, and 3 respectively. In the final build, this only happens if you use a password. Another sprite difference, the mermen look more like the creature from the Black Lagoon instead of the fishmen they do in the final build. So the Hellhound mid-boss sprite is totally different and looks less wolf-like, but it does have the same attack, so really the only difference is the sprite. You'll notice there's no scene transitions like there are in the final build either. It just fades to black and you're on to the next section. Another thing you'll notice is pole vaulting takes much longer to charge up. It takes about, I'd say, twice as long to charge up in the beta than it does in the final build, which turns out to be a bit of an issue in later levels, so I understand why they changed it. So the Skull Dragon that is at the base of the stairs up to the castle keep takes less hits to kill. There is a bug in this build also that makes it so even though you might get hit by an enemy, you don't necessarily lose your weapon crash. So you'll lose the spear power-up, but you won't lose the special item crash. The stage ending doesn't show any flavor text or score countdown, nor does it show any kind of a password screen. If you want to zip around in stages, you specifically have to use the Konami code and a certain code scheme in order to jump around. In stage 2, Minotaurs take a ton more hits to kill. I'd say at least 3 times the hits, and this makes things very difficult in certain areas and required much balancing for the final build. This might be unique to only normal mode. I did not play through easy mode yet. The invincible fuzz that you see on platforms are a bit more dynamic and have a bit more fuzz on them, as you can see. So the water mage and the armor bosses that are the mid-bosses of the stage all do not show a health bar for their fights. The water mage takes about 2 hits, while the armors seem to have normal health. You'll notice the Medusa head sprites have a bit more dynamic shading to them, and they also have red eyes and blood on the stumps of their heads that do not make it into the final release either. What's also unique is the Minotaur room that leads up to the final boss has 2 levels instead of just 1, and features unfinished backgrounds. On to stage 3, Harpies do not attack in Section 3.1, but you can see them flying off screen as you get to their trigger points. The Bone Dragon King mini-boss does not exist in this build, so you just completely bypass that room. Again, this section is where you notice how Eric's pole vault move takes so long to charge, and that it kind of strays at an angle towards the end of the animation, making the pole vaulting kind of treacherous in areas that require precision jumps. So the platform climb up to the top of the tower features platforms that are much smaller than in the final build as well, and much more treacherous, especially with the gargoyles. The Hell Wyvern or Gargoyle boss fight at the end of the stage features a sprite that is not there. And it seems that they hadn't finished the sprite yet, so they just have a bunch of axe sub-weapons as stand-ins for the boss. With Stage 4, this is definitely the most different stage between the 0.5 beta build and the final release. In this area, there are largely no enemies that attack you, and it's a pretty easy go in terms of just traversing through the levels. Area 4.2 is laid out pretty differently with some different sprite work as well. The piston room is almost completely different, and you descend rather than ascend like you do in the final. This is the build with the fabled Molten Foundry room found in the game previews that never made it into the final release. And to be honest, it's pretty ridiculous. As you can see, the area's unfinished, platforms disappear at random almost, and you have to kind of pop around to make them solidify or appear in order to move on any further into this portion of the area. So this is pretty much where the normal game ends in terms of being able to go through the rest of the build normally, section through section. And you have to use the Konami code to do the stage select to continue any further into the game. Seriously though, this area is absolutely ridiculous. This area is so buggy that God help you if you were able to actually make it to the very end. This build also contains the Zeppelin room found in the game previews and the Terra 200 leak. This area was completely omitted from the final build along with the Molten Foundry room, but you can see that there is the trigger platform for the door that did make it into the final build. This is the area that normally would have a bunch of ghost heads and a lot of platforming. So this is the infamous blade room. As you can see, the blades are less treacherous, and you can get through them relatively easily. Now with Section 4.8, as you can see, it's completely buggy and glitched to hell and back, and this is not something that you can traverse normally, and you have to use Konami code and stage select to be able to get past this, or at least I did. So the final boss, the Gear Steamer, doesn't seem to be any different than he is in the final game build. He's just as goofy as you remember him. So a special section that you can use the stage select to get to, this is a secondary 410 room that features what appears to be a test fight for the Dracula battle in the final game that seems almost complete except for some balancing and the obvious lack of backgrounds. On to Stage 5 that you can get to with the stage select code. As you can see, 5.1 is completely unfinished except for some platforms and the Rose Trap. There are large chunks of this stage that are complete, except for the lack of enemies. Though some moving platforms have not been added and can't be traversed, such as the rotating tower. As you may have noticed, the Talos mini-boss has not been added to this build, and in Stage 5.6, the Silhouette boss is completely unfinished, and you just can't beat this area. The boss fight music will turn on, but obviously the silhouette faces do not generate, and therefore you cannot move past this area. On to Stage 5.7. This is almost complete and features a full Princess of Moss battle, though as you can see her sprites are completely different from the final build, which is a little disappointing, but I understand why they did the design change. And that's the 0.5 beta build. The ROM is buggy, and there is a cleaned up version that was created that fixes a lot of the bugs, but the game still has a lot that's unfinished, and there are areas that just have complete voids that you'll fall to your death in without even realizing it. It's still a really cool prototype though, and there is a lot in there that I wish they'd kept for the final build. I absolutely loved all the stuff in Stage 4, and it really kind of showed how much they were trying to drive home the fact that the game is meant to be set during World War I, and I really wish they'd kept the Foundry and Zeppelin areas. Other changes make sense, like most of the sprite changes, however, so take what you can get. Either way, this has been a bit of a white whale of mine, and I can't tell you how excited I am to have been able to get my hands on this and finally play through it and see what the game was starting to become before it was released how it was. It's neat to see what the preliminary game looked like, and I'm curious what others might think too, so please leave a comment with your thoughts on this beta and subscribe for more Castlevania content. Thanks for watching, guys.